Hi, everybody. I'm Suzanne Keene, and I'm the Dean of the College here at Washington and Lee University. And it makes no sense for me to take any of your valuable time because we've spent it on technological stuff, which I think is the first lesson about anything with blended learning, is that some time will be spent on technological stuff. But I just want to warmly welcome everybody to this conversation and thank you for your participation. We're so happy to have you all here, and I'll turn over to Dick, who will do a proper job of welcoming everybody and getting things launched. But just this is just a big hello and a big thanks all at once, and enjoy your conversation. Thank you. It's wet and cold out there.
Is it raining where you are, guys?
No, it's not raining. We just got an earthquake.
It's raining here, and we're supposed to have snow tonight.
No.
You don't like a high-tech tape?
Snow's in the forecast.
That way they'll pay attention to you if you're moving around. Oh, now I have people there.
Okay, we'll take about 2 minutes here, and I just do have a few things I'd like to say, if that's okay with everybody. First of all, I have to say good afternoon, everyone. I have it on my script here in front of me.
All right. Good afternoon.
Thank you. You're supposed to respond.
Paul or Dick? I'm confused
Just
now.
call me George.
George.
Named after my father-in-law's dog. That's what he called me. Anyway, I want to welcome you officially also, after Suzanne Keene was here, to what we're doing this afternoon with the Associated Colleges of the South. And in case you're not aware, these are various universities as a part of that, the University of Richmond, Furman University, Southwestern University, and Washington and Lee University. And the title of our whole project is A Blended Learning Approach for the Professional Advancement of Language Educators. And we have to say thank you to the ACS for providing us with money to be able to have this project program. And in addition to this opening program that we have today, we have 3 additional workshops which are going to be in the fall, and which we hope will be greatly attended by our colleagues, as it might be a better time of the year for that. I have to mention that we do have 2 individuals who will be joining us eventually here this afternoon, and these are Professor Nancy Decker and Professor Anna Lohaus from Rollins in Orlando, and this is also one of the ACS schools, and they will be helping us in doing our assessment for the whole project. I'd also like to express thanks to Dr. Lisa Harris, who's from the Virginia Department of Education and who is the Specialist of Foreign Languages and International Education. We appreciate her being here with us this afternoon in order to lead us in our workshop, which is titled, in case you don't know, as it's right up there on the screen, Blended Learning as Best Practice. And so I'll turn it over now to Lisa, and let's get with it. And I'm going to move up to the chat window, and if you have any inquiries or anything like that, any technical problems, maybe I can help you with that at the time if needed. Okay, thanks very much for being here. Lisa.
Thank you, Dick. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Glad to see you all made it out in what is to here a rainy day. After a beautiful weekend that we had, we're now looking forward to sub-freezing temperatures this evening. I'm very pleased to be here and so happy to be able to help you kick off this inaugural event, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the results that you achieve in incorporating blended learning into what you have to offer to your learners as they participate in your programs. This session is titled Blended Learning as Best Practice, and I'm going to refer quite frequently to some of the articles that were posted online in advance. If, however, you were not able to pre-read, it's okay. We're going to differentiate our discussions today, which will sort of make accommodations for those both who were able to glean from that pre-reading and those who did not yet have the opportunity to do so. Also, as part of incorporating our technology into blended learning, just a couple of quick notes. Dick is going to be monitoring the chat so that if you have a question you want to bring out, go ahead and type it in there. If it's not taking place during our regular question and answer portions. This will be very interactive, and so I'm going to quite frequently throw things out to the site coordinators. And so when we do that, each host site person will be responsible for leading the individual small group conversations at your sites, and then deciding on whether the coordinator will report back or have somebody within the group to act as the reporter and report back for that group. Sometimes we'll ask for a verbal report out, and sometimes we'll ask you to just type a quick chat in as you're going to let us know if you have any specific items we want to bring up. I think that's it for the technology part. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think I lost the PowerPoint here. All right, who's got them? Okay, well, while we're waiting for that screen to come up, it's going to pop up here in just a moment. I will just reiterate that this particular workshop is designed to help uncover what blended learning is, how to apply it in your particular settings, and how the learner in your settings will profit from its use. Okay. Oh, the one other thing I am going to ask is, when it's not your turn to speak, would you go ahead and mute the microphones on your end, and that'll eliminate some of the feedback. Great. Hopefully that'll sound better on your end. Once everybody gets a chance to mute the microphones, it should eliminate some of that reverberation. This is also a good time to share with you that when I talk about a learner, I'm not necessarily talking about a K-12 student or even a university student, but rather this can be applicable to adult participants in a professional development workshop, graduate students who are coming back for a methods course, those who are in a pre-service or in-service furthering their own professional development workshops, teacher preparation or education class, really any setting in which there is a teaching and learning component. And even though today we're focusing pretty much on world languages, this is also applicable to any content area. This is not a content-specific method, although the benefits may vary from content to content, as you'll see a little bit later on. All right, I'm going to click again, and hopefully the mouse will not go off the screen. It's not forwarding the... I'll click on the arrow. Here? Okay. It doesn't act like PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so we're going to work on 4 guiding questions to get us through this workshop today, and you can see that they're up there. And the first thing we'll do is talk a little bit about what is best practice and make sure that we're on the same page for what we mean by that. Some definitions of blended learning, some pretty concrete ones, some of the benefits and challenges, and then we're going to get into a lot of small group discussion about what it would actually look like in your setting and how you could apply it to meet your needs. So starting out with best practice, if you're going to go to your first small group assignment, so I'm going to ask the on-site facilitators to lead your group through just a quick 2-minute brainstorming. What do you think best practice is when we're talking about teaching and learning? And I'm going to mute the mic on our end for 2 minutes, and when I come back on, I'll call you back together. So if you'll go ahead and lead through that discussion, what is best practice when we're talking about teaching and learning? Okay, and we're going to bring you back together in 5. And we're going to get ready to report out. And just to get us started, I'm going to call each site by name so that you can unmute your microphone at that time and so you can hear everybody else. Just for this one, we're going to start with the Washington and Lee group and get a report back from our group. What did you come up with when you talked about what is best practice?
We agree that it would be student-centered, not teacher-centered. It would be a practice which gets all the students involved, and it would be well-planned and with a particular outcome in mind.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Furman, if you'd like to unmute your mic and go ahead and report out next, and then we'll put Richmond on deck.
When we were talking about best practice, we didn't look at it in terms of what specific techniques in foreign languages are best practice, but we defined the expression itself as a tried and true technique or pedagogy that you can implement in education that has been proven or shown effective.
Excellent. Okay. And Richmond, and then we will put Southwestern up.
One of you. Somebody say something. Oh, I'll go. I mean, we're having a debate of who's going to talk. Basically, it was the same thing that was said by Washington and Lee. Student-centered, meaningful learning, means relevant to the students, and for us particularly, target language.
Okay. All right, excellent. And then we'll hear from Southwestern. And remember to mute your mic again once you've finished reporting out.
Okay, what we talked about was basically that it would be outcome-based, that if it is, that we would want to identify what particular kind of outcome, whether it's research or some aspect of proficiency or what have you, and that the best practice would be the thing that would produce the best outcome for that particular field or register or skill.
Okay, excellent. And you are all absolutely right. There is no one right or wrong definition of best practice. It is all of those things. But I'll tell you the definition that I really like the best is one that I just came across very recently in a blog post. And here it is. You know, simple and yet profound. It's what works best for your students. So best practice in my classroom may be different than what is a best practice in your classroom. And so that brings us back to always keeping in mind that we're talking about individual learners here, and we need to incorporate their needs whenever we decide what practice we're going to use. So now we've talked a little bit about what best practice is. Is blended learning best practice? Well, in order to decide that, we're going to have to see a little bit about what blended learning can do. If you did some of your advanced readings, you might have had a chance to see some of the research on what blended learning brings to the teaching and learning environment. And just go ahead and type into the chat screen if you have something, and we'll call on you, that you think you saw in the research. Did anybody read anything or see anything about what blended learning might bring that would make you think it is a best practice?
What I liked from what I read was the fact that it provided a lot more interaction. There was a chance of one-on-one, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom.
Okay.
I also gathered that it would take a lot of training for a professor or a teacher to do this well. It has to be well planned in order for it to work. But the results in some of the studies that were listed was pretty impressive as to how well the students did learn, as compared to just online or just correspondence or just in the classroom.
I haven't done my readings, but I know that online learning engage more students, so the community of learners is bigger than the one that you have in your classroom. No? You can connect more people.
So we've got the interactivity, we've got the engagement, we've got the expansion of the pool of learners. What about from any of our other sites? I don't see anything in the chat box. Did anyone else see anything they wanted to interject from the readings or from your own practice?
Also the
How about Furman?
Hi, I just wrote in the chat box that maybe blended learning can allow us to make the most of our time both in and outside the class.
Okay.
And I think saying something.
I think that we, in some ways, a lot of the online things are already produced by the textbook, so they're, if I understood the readings correctly.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Richmond.
I just typed in the chat that the stuff, what I read confirmed basically that there's a real question about how it might work in schools like ours where we really emphasize face-to-face small class instruction. It seemed that the comparisons were blended learning versus totally online more than blended learning versus intensive face-to-face. So that we have to think about what we're trying to do with blended learning before we can really do any real comparisons of how it might work.
And that one research study did emphasize the comparison between straight online. There is another link that was put up afterwards from the 2012 Star Talk report that talks about some of the comparisons to the face-to-face learning, and there's some findings from there for that. We're waiting for the PowerPoint to come back up on the screen. We're trying to up that, but basically two of the quotes that I put up from the U.S. Department of Education found just exactly what you said, that introducing fully or partially online components can improve educational productivity, and that was one of the findings from the Star Talk report that was applicable K-12, and there was another. Let me find that one for you, from the EDUCAUSE report. If you had a chance to take a look at that blended learning, the best of both worlds article that found that the courses have the potential to increase student learning outcomes while lowering attrition rates in comparison with the fully online courses. And that might be the line that you were looking at where the comparison came from for there. All right, so that's a little bit of what the research says, but we really have to get to a definition of what blended learning is. And so we're going to start out once again by having you brainstorm and see, first of all, what you learned from your reading, what you know intuitively, and what you think just from seeing the title, what is blended learning? And so once again, I'm going to ask each site person to lead you through a discussion of what that blended learning definition might be based on your previous experience. And we'll take 2 minutes to do that now.
in the class with everybody and individually outside. I think
Okay.
that's
Right, we're going to bring you back together here in 5. And we're hearing some great conversation here at Washington Lee. I hope you had some on your sites as well. And I think this time we're going to start with Richmond. If you'll go ahead and get your mic ready to share out what your discussion was, and then we will put Furman on deck.
I'm not
Richmond, are you able to hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear us?
There you go. I've got you now.
Okay. Well, we were talking about you know, I guess the blended experience would mean less seat time and I guess more online activities, but we thought that the purpose of it would be to maximize interaction in class, right? So that is, the quality of the seat time in class would be enhanced by the fact that you'd be doing other activities elsewhere that would open the space to best take advantage of the fact that you have bodies in a room, right?
Excellent. Yep, that's a great point. Okay. Anything else from Richmond?
Well, I think it is important to say that we talked about it not just in terms of online, but we've also been thinking a lot about experiential learning.
Right.
That takes place outside. For example, our self-directed Korean students, we all went to a restaurant and they ordered in Korean. Mm-hmm. And that's part of their class, but it's not in the formal setting.
All right, excellent. Okay, Richmond, we'll get you to mute and we'll get Furman to come on deck. And we'll put Southwestern up next.
Okay. I guess we were looking at blended learning in the narrow sense of the traditional face-to-face class married with distance learning through technology. And I guess the question that just came up is whether or not blended learning is limited to what we say to technology, or if it's if we can't consider experiential learning as blended learning. It's just something that we're unsure of.
Good questions. When we get into the concrete definitions, we'll see if it answers what you're looking for there, or if maybe the definitions need to be expanded a little bit based on what we have available. So it's an excellent question. I'm not going to try to address the answer right now, but we're going to bring that one back when we get into more concrete definitions. Okay, anything else from Furman? All right, we'll have you mute and bring Southwestern up.
Okay, the one thing that we talked about with blended learning, meaning shared classrooms and experiences that we've had with that, one big advantage that I have observed is that you get to have encounters with experts in your field who are your colleagues that you wouldn't otherwise get the same exposure to. I don't have other people are doing Chinese language studies or Chinese subject studies here on campus. Well, a little bit, but not that much. So I can, as I work with other colleagues on other campuses, the relationship that we have with each other as colleagues turns into a learner relationship. And so I'm learning with the students, and the students are learning with me, and we're all learning from another person who's expert. There are several levels in there. Gaining other expertise, becoming a learner, sharing an experience together. And then the other aspects of doing hands-on things that Richmond brought up is also a critical aspect too, I think, that you're getting more fully engaged and not just sitting in front of a screen or sitting in a classroom.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'm going to share with you sort of a philosophical definition that came out of the EDUCAUSE report, that 2004 Zuban, Hartman, and Moscow report. And they've sort of stated blended learning is viewed as a pedagogical approach that combines the effectiveness and socialization opportunities of the classroom with the technologically enhanced active learning possibilities of the online environment. So this is a sort of philosophical look at it, but if you read and did the pre-reading and you looked at that Christensen Institute report, you will have seen a more concrete definition. Did you have a chance to look at there? Go ahead and just type in from your sites if you had a chance to take a look at that definition or not. How about here? Did you guys have a chance to look?
Links or
Okay.
I knew it, but I can't remember all of
Okay.
what I read, but I read.
So it looks like a mixed bag. Some had the opportunity, and I know some of you signed up a lot later than others, but you will have a chance to go ahead and read them again afterwards if you like. But the Christensen Institute has a 3-test definition for this. And the first part of it is that at least in part, there's an online learning element, and that students have some kind of control over the time, place, pathway, or space, some sort of control over those elements. The second part of the test is that it's at least in part a supervised location away from home, a brick and mortar classroom or a learning lab where they meet together. So not in the home, but in another location together with a face-to-face component. And the third part of their test is that each student's learning path within a course or subject is connected in some way to their own experience and provides an integrated learning experience so that what they are doing in the face-to-face portion ties into what they are doing with the brick and mortar or the online experience and the face-to-face experience. So they're coming together in a way that meets the needs of the students. Although it is still a formal education program, even though the elements may vary across. And that's the Christensen definition. When we get our PowerPoint back, I'll show you a graphical representation of what this looks like in a foreign language example or a world language example. And I will tell you right now, I use these interchangeably. Right now, the Virginia Department of Education still has foreign language in our standards, in our legal documents, but we are making the gradual transition to world language where we can. So I slip back and forth between them. But in the world language classroom, if you're familiar with Middlebury Institute, they've got a nice graphical representation, and it also gives some examples of what that face-to-face component could be appropriate for, which elements it would fit, and which elements that virtual environment would fit real well. And so when we get a chance to see that, we'll bring it up to show. And while we're waiting for that technology to come in, another part of one of the reports you read, the one that was called Blended Learning, Uncovering Its Transformative Potential in Higher Education. If you had a chance to read that, there's some very powerful statements in there. And since you can't see it, I'm going to read it twice and hope you'll be able to remember it. I'm going to ask you to discuss this statement. Okay, so here's the first statement I want you to discuss. There is evidence that blended learning has the potential to be more effective and efficient when compared to a traditional classroom model. Okay, so I'm going to read it for the second time. There is evidence that blended learning has the potential to be more effective and efficient when compared to a traditional classroom model. So in the small groups, we're just going to discuss for just 1 minute, what does that mean? What does that mean for us as practitioners? Okay, I'm going to give you 1 minute to discuss that.
like it.
Excellent.
Because I find that the students also like it. I think
Yeah.
it gives them a sense of accomplishment.
Mhm.
It opens up a space for creativity for them, and they can they have a say or a control.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Excellent.
not
And we're
just the
gonna
teachers. So
Right, exactly.
and I can see them teach each other. I've witnessed this
Okay.
peer-to-peer mentoring.
Excellent.
So
Okay.
I think that would be my ultimate goal, you know, if I can just be there and facilitate and see them, you know.
We've got some really good discussions going on here at the Washington and Lee end, and it's great to hear the thought going in behind them. Big thank you, Southwestern, for the tech support tip. I just went ahead and did it. Dick was still out looking for somebody from tech support, so we've got the screen back up for you. So thanks for that tip. Rather than have everybody share out this time, I want to ask you to either use your raise your hand icon up at the top or put in the chat box if you have something to share. And we will call only on those who have something they would like to share out about this particular quote coming in. And Washington and Lee had a great conversation going on about it. And the hardest part about facilitating a time-delimited workshop is that sometimes you have to cut short some really powerful conversations to get a chance to move on through the rest of it. But I hope when that happens, you will keep on with those conversations in the chat boards that will be put up afterwards. So don't lose track of those and be able to go back and share some more thoughts when that comes to mind. And I see that we've got some typing from Furman coming up. Furman, did you want to share? Go ahead and unmute. Okay.
Should we share or do you want to read the?
Okay, I see yours in the chat now, and I see Richmond with their hand up. So Furman, do you want to add anything before you go off?
No, I think that's pretty much what we wanted to say.
Okay, excellent. And Richmond, then we see we have your hand up.
Okay, so our question is that if blended learning is combining online with face-to-face, haven't we been doing this pretty much all along, and what does defining it as blended learning bring that's new to what we've been doing for 15 years at least?
Well, that's really a great question, and actually Dick and I had a conversation about this earlier. Some have been doing this all along, you're absolutely right. I think what we're doing now in the research is bringing together a lot of these anecdotes of where it's taken place and actually gathering data on blended learning. It's not so much that blended learning is new, but that there's so much more awareness of it, and that there's so many more pieces of it that we can bring in now. Things that have come about in the last few years, like using Skype for bringing in authentic speakers to your classroom, using other types of technologies that weren't available in previous years to go ahead and increase the opportunities for blended learning. But Dick, who just walked back in, and I had a really interesting discussion about this earlier, and he's saying that, why is this new? Is this not something that we've been doing all along? And the answer to that is yes, many people have, but those who do don't realize that it's not as prevalent everywhere as it is because you use it as a natural part of your instruction. I'm going to add it. We're talking about blended learning. What does it bring that's new? Because people have been using this all along.
I think it's the very tools that we have available to us now that make it more unique. By the fact that we can video, we can use PowerPoint, we can give readings ahead of time electronically, we can follow up with all of these videos that we can look at. We can have discussion boards and continue our discussion. All of these things really help us in being able to improve upon our methods and our ways of training one another and teaching our students that we have in the classroom.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any other hands. Did anybody else want to add anything more to that? Okay. I told you I'd come back to that graphic for you. And this is it. It's the one from Middlebury Interactive. And you can see that I told you they show a little bit about the different types of things that they use. Oh, I see a physical hand there on Southwestern.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm here. Okay, well, the thing that we talked about is that, you know, the definition includes the word potential and the transformative power, that you need to know what you're trying to achieve, and you need to have a pedagogical objective, and I think that needs to be primary. Without the pedagogical purpose being primary, then you're just adding things in just to add it in. And so then we talk about the need to assess that. We talk about a professor that uses little quick quizzes that go with her outside activities to see if the students have actually mastered it, and students can do these outside activities to improve their scores and have immediate feedback. But the issue to me is the pedagogical objective, which can be tailor-made for any campus or any classroom, but the potential ought to be assessed. Find out if you're succeeding.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's not something that you do just because it's there, but because it's filling a need that exists, not create a need because we have it. I think that's a great point. The second point that I wanted to look at in this transformative potential article is the quote that you see up on the screen now, and I won't read this one twice since you can see it now, I hope. And I'd like to focus, and when I have you discuss on this for a moment, on these particular items that they say we can achieve by incorporating blended learning: increased course completion rates, improved retention, better student attitudes toward the subject, student satisfaction, and all of these are compared to the mode of instruction compared to traditional formats. So once again, we're going to take one moment in your small groups and discuss what this statement says to you and how you feel about these 4 outcomes that this report indicates that you might be able to actually improve in the higher education arena. Okay, in 1 minute. And again, we've got some great conversations going on here. I want to bring you back together. And again, once, just as with the previous one, if you'll use that little raise your hand button up there at the top of your screen, if somebody in your group wants to share what you have, and I will watch for that. We talked a little bit here in Washington Lee about the immediacy that it brings to formative assessment, being able to let students know right away how they're doing, which we thought was one good piece that you could bring to it. It took a little bit of the burden of waiting off of the students going through. I see Richmond is typing in. Does anybody else wanted to speak?
We were just talking, oh, can I speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. We were just talking about how we thought that these findings might be more applicable or more consistent with a larger university rather than a small liberal arts college, or at least that was a question that came up, especially because students are expecting and are coming to this school to have that face-to-face interaction. So that's just something that we brought up as a group. And also, is this article referring to all types of content, especially since foreign language learning as we view it, is so much different than learning history or, I don't know, any other type of subject matter. It's just a different type of learning, so.
All good questions to consider, and as you go through the process of deciding what type of blended learning, and we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about different types of blended learning, that's something you'll take into account. And there's gradations of blended learning. The amount of time spent face-to-face versus the amount of time spent in the virtual environment. And the type of activities that will take place in the virtual environment may vary for the different types of universities. So those are all things to keep in mind. And Richmond has typed a comment into the chat box also about the relevance of the increased student satisfaction and really depending upon the quality, and that absolutely is the case. Not just getting online for the sake of getting online, but rather true, valuable online or virtual experiences. And when we say virtual experiences, they're not necessarily on a pre-programmed computer program. There are other types of virtual experiences, as you're well aware of, being able to incorporate Skype into conversing with a native speaker of the language, being able to participate in an unconference for an adult learner, being able to attend something that's taking place many miles away by logging in to your computer to hear what's talking. So there's all different kinds of gradations of what you can incorporate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the types of blended learning opportunities. Okay. I threw this one in here, just a couple of findings that you'll see from the tomorrow.org's 2013 Speak Up report. A couple of interesting findings. There's many more if you get a chance to take a look at it. This is their second year review of flipped learning and some of the things they noted on there. It was interesting that 89% of parents want their child to be in a class where mobile devices were used. I thought that was a very interesting finding that they had. And the student view of those who participated in this, seeing it as a more personal and controlled learning process. And I think, once again, going back to what Richmond commented, I think we're talking about well-implemented programs when you look at these results, and not necessarily just those who are having an online experience to say they've had an online experience. Okay. Why do we want to blend? You've had a lot of good questions about what's the purpose of it, how would it suit my individual place. In the 2012 Star Talk report, they actually came up with 9 reasons behind the economies of blended learning and why you might want to use it. The first one that you see listing, broadening access to the resources, to the experiences, especially for students who are out in remote locations and who are in programs that face traditionally low enrollments. If you can bring students in via a virtual environment, you can reduce your costs but still be able to offer programs that might not make if they had to rely solely on the brick and mortar students attending. Their second finding was that it was engaging for students, and I think that goes right back to what you said previously, that it needs to be well done in order to meet that criteria. It really helps to be able to individualize and differentiate the instruction, especially when you talked about the assessment and the other learning experiences that you can provide. Personalizing by focusing on individual student interests, increasing their time on task perhaps, and leading to some better outcomes with that. They found that there was a better use of both teacher and student time by automating some of the routine tasks. And again, someone here in Washington Lee mentioned that automation of quiz results and the immediacy of the feedback. And then somebody mentioned earlier in our earlier discussion about being able to take advantage of your face-to-face time for those more high-value activities by automating some of those more routine things. The next one that you see, reducing facilities cost, and this, I think they were talking about using alternate spaces and being able to not necessarily have to book entire classrooms. The salary costs, again, I think it was increasing the number of students that you mentioned that teachers can reach, and also by more effectively using the teacher's time. And then the last one, the economies of scale, is really the same thing, being able to reuse materials and distribute them out on a large scale, more so than just in a traditional face-to-face classroom. So that's some of the findings from that particular report. From a teacher's perspective, I found a blog site online. It was a K-12 teacher staff development site, and it was talking about on the Teachers Professional Learning Board, some of the specific benefits and challenges that the teachers saw to using blended learning. And up on the screen you can see what some of them are. Incorporating this blended learning approach can help to stimulate the students to be active and get that shift from the lecture mode to the more student-centered learning. Increasing those interactions between students, teachers, and whatever resources you might bring in for instruction. It can help plan a lecture. It doesn't mean it would take the place of a lecture, but it can help make a lecture more interesting and engaging for the students. Using multimedia tools, online mediums, and other technology-aided instruction can really increase the interactive activities, debates, oral presentations, and things like that. Flexible schedules they mentioned, being more convenient for students when you can select when you're going to sit down to do part of your work. And then the last one they mentioned was allowing that time for that thoughtful reflection as it pertains to the personalized learning experience. And of course, not everybody had all benefits. There were some challenges, and I listed just a few of what they listed up there. And one of the main ones is getting students involved in what this process looks like, how it works, how to shift some of that responsibility from the teacher to the students. Some of the accountability for learning moves away from our traditional, I'm responsible for making sure every student has this content, to the students responsible for making sure they've logged in, but you still have to have some kind of accountability. So how do you do that? Do you create an online check-through system that students have to go through in order to make sure they've accomplished whatever task you set out? Or is there some kind of roster that they have to check in with? And then the last one, I think that really fits in with what I think it was Furman was talking about, really making sure that the need is suitable, that the online and classroom content mesh, that you're only doing online what needs to be done online, and that you're doing face-to-face what is more suitable face-to-face, and that they really should complement each other and not necessarily be mutually exclusive of each other. So that was a really interesting site that I thought had some nice little points about pros and cons. And we're going to stop there for just a minute and see if you can think of any additional benefits and challenges. We said pros and cons quite commonly, but I listed the benefits and challenges. And think right now, practical basis. What are some practical benefits and some practical challenges? Do you have more to add to this list? We're going to take just a couple of minutes, maybe about 2 minutes, to see if we can come up with anything to add to this list. And facilitators, if you'll lead that on site, we'll go ahead and start leading that here now.
using it in class.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, again, I hope you'll continue the Washington Lee discussion in the afterboards because you started to bring up some excellent points. And we're going to ask the other sites to share off. This time I want to go back around round robin, see what you thought. I want to ask each site if you came up either with something new to add to the list or some comment you want to make on something already on the list. And so I'm going to have, we haven't had Southwestern go first yet, so I think I'll put you on the spot and I'll have Southwestern go first. So if you'll go ahead and unmute, and then we will get Richmond ready to be on deck.
Okay, the practical benefits, well, I'm just going to come from a Chinese perspective, but I've noticed an incredible expansion of student abilities in acquiring vocabulary because they have such a vaster range, if that's even a word, of material out there and ways to access it and read it so that you can even read it the way you read a French novel. You can sound it out as you read along, which is a really big thing for Chinese. On the challenges that we were talking about are design and implementation and the time that it takes and the creation to do that. And one of the things we talked about in response to that is engaging students to actually do some of the design and the activities, even if they're not masters of the language or whatever, they can still create some activities and have other students participate in it and get engaged at the mental level in creating and implementing. But the time and the effort involved in creation and designing and making things work out, that's a challenge. On the other hand, something that I wanted to talk about earlier is that Melanie here went to the South by Southwest connected portion, technical part, and while she was there, people at UT, University of Texas, Austin, said that a smaller liberal arts college has a great advantage over the larger universities because they have the flexibility to implement things. So that, you know, that's something that we all should recognize being in ACS, that we have an ability and opportunity to share things.
Okay. Excellent points. Okay. Richmond, we're going to go ahead and have you unmute and share out, and then we're going to put Washington and Lee on deck, and we'll have you report out from here.
I just typed in that one of the things is we talked a lot. Two of us teach a self-directed program, and we know how hard it is to get students to navigate the process and do thoughtful reflection, which is a real benefit, is to personalize and do thoughtful reflection. But in a classroom or a blended learning situation, it is so difficult to design these activities. A real challenge is the need for expertise in instructional design, and to get the activities that you're doing outside to be related to the in-class activities in the student's mind. I think many of us, the activities are related in the faculty member's mind, and it's hard for us to get the students to see the relevance of the two sets of activities.
It's a very profound statement. I think we could all relate to that particular challenge. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Richmond. And we're going to have Washington Lee point out, and then Furman.
We were also speaking about the challenges of the technical expertise that is sometimes needed by the teacher to, as you said, to design the online activities, to contextualize the activities within the theme or the thematics that are happening in the classroom. And it's wonderful that the parents would like the students to be in classrooms where they can use the new technological gadgets, but it requires the teacher to be able to send material to these gadgets. You know, you should be able to do a webinar or a wiki, or how do you train for these things, and then keep the class, the quality of the class at the level that you want to.
Okay. So that training piece is an excellent point to bring up. And then we're going to have Furman wrap this part up.
Okay, we'll start with some of the benefits that we discussed. We think that blended learning can help students prepare for class discussions since they have to interact with the material beforehand. So could possibly enable them to be more, to participate more in class if they have to do something outside of class related to the topic at hand. It can also potentially create a virtual community and create a class community that extends beyond the confines of the class itself. So bringing that, if they're participating in blogs or discussion boards, students can interact with one another and create rapport beyond the class time. And depending on the technology, it could give perhaps the introverted student a voice if it's asynchronous communication, blogging, discussion boards, whereas they might be more reticent to speak if in front of other people, and producing in the foreign language is very important, but written production is something that we target as well. So that could just maybe be a place where they could excel in that. Also, in terms of the challenges, technology can be a gamble sometimes. So if it fails, then there goes a lot of everything. We were also mentioning that no matter how well it is designed, the activity, it's less personal, and it probably doesn't have the effect as an in-person class interaction would in terms of motivation with the student. So we're wondering how much it can really motivate the student as opposed to being with the teacher who's exuberant, who can really stimulate interest in person. And we also were thinking, who's behind these initiatives? Is it something the administration wants, or is it something that's really faculty driven? So
makes a difference. Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you for wrapping that up for us, Furman, and thank you all for the great conversations. Couple of conclusions from those reports before we move on to the next center. You guys mentioned this right out and really keyed in on it. The online instruction can have some positive outcomes, but it has to really promote self-reflection, self-regulation, and self-monitoring on the part of the students to be able to make that happen. And the one key that I really keyed in on this Star Talk report was that the ability to engage the learners in the target language for longer periods of time. That part just sort of stood out at me because that experiential part that you can't get in a 45-minute or a 60-minute or a 90-minute block, if you can effectively extend that into a virtual experience, can really help to get the engagement in the language out with the students. So the technology, you guys have mentioned a lot about that. This is the last thing I'm going to give from this report, and that was, these are some of the things they said you could actually use the technology in the world language classroom to help you do. This one was specific for world languages. And somebody else mentioned, I think it was Richmond, but forgive me if it was somebody else, talking about that synchronous versus asynchronous interactions and how it can bring in students who weren't necessarily going to share their voice in the immediacy of the face-to-face environment, which is a good point that you can bring out online. And then providing that focused feedback, somebody here at Washington and Lee mentioned being able to have a pronunciation monitor give immediate feedback, and also being able to bring in authentic materials that might not have previously been available. Those are some of the few, and you can see the others listed there, and this is online if you want to see the rest in that Star Talk Blended Learning report. Okay, so now we're going to get into something different. What does this look like for you? If you decided blended learning works for you, what would you have to keep in mind first? Well, the first thing you have to know is what different types of blended learning are available to you. And this Christensen Institute report sort of boiled them all down into this one nice little graphic where they fit into 4 main models, and there's variations of them. And you can see them up there, and you'll note on there that that self-blend model, The report that was posted online was a little bit more updated than when I made mine, and so they've actually renamed that to the a la carte model in the most recent report. But in the one that I used originally doing this, it was still called the self-blend model. And it's self-blend, a la carte sort of lends itself to what takes place there. But we're going to talk specifically about each of these different types of blended learning. We're not going to focus just on technology-enhanced brick-and-mortar classrooms because that's not the same thing. And we're also not going to focus on purely online classes, whether they be full-time or part-time. We're going to look specifically at these models of blended learning, where you have both a brick-and-mortar face-to-face component and some type of virtual experience. So if you did your homework, you should be a little bit familiar with the blended learning models from that report. And if not, well, you're going to get a chance to see a little bit more about them now. And the first one we're going to look at is called this rotation model. The name really describes a lot about what you're looking to see. You're going to rotate between something. Some of the main points of this are that at least one component will be online learning, and they're rotating between the online learning and something else, whether it be stations, whether it be labs, whether it be assignments of different types. They're going to be flipping back and forth between, or rotating, excuse me, between online learning and something else. And it was broken down into basically four main types: a station rotation, the lab rotation, the flipped classroom, the individual rotation, and there's some little unique aspects that make each one different from the other. So the station rotation usually takes place within the individual classroom, and students rotate between perhaps a small group discussion, an individual tutoring session, and then maybe an online program that could be synchronous or asynchronous. It can be personalized, a session that they sit down to just for themselves, or it could be they're joining a Skype session, or they're going on to a game that is online, some type of online component that they're rotating through on a fixed schedule that's set by the teacher. It's different from some of the other models because it is the entire class rotating through all the stations at the same time. The lab rotation is very similar. The only difference is you leave the classroom. It's not stations within a class. You are having face-to-face instruction in a classroom, and then you're leaving on a fixed schedule or at the teacher's discretion to an online learning lab or some other location or lab where there's a component of virtual education, whether, again, you're going to a Skype session, a computer station, or some other online learning opportunity. The flipped classroom is probably the one you've heard the most about in the news lately, and that's the one really where the actual instruction is taking place outside of the face-to-face setting. The students are going online and accessing the instruction, and when you come face-to-face, you're doing the follow-up, the application, the further discussions, the small group work or the projects that you're using based on that instruction, and really gives a lot of accountability to the students to not go home and do homework and if I did it or didn't do it, but I'm actually going home and doing my learning so that I can come back to class and do those components that I might have done at home before. And then lastly, that individual rotation one is customizable. It's a fixed schedule, but it varies by student. It's not the whole class going from one station to another or one lab to another. This student might go to these 3 stations. These group of students might go to this set of stations. So it's individualized based on their needs, either where they're at in their proficiency levels perhaps, or where they're at in their needs to get through the materials taught in that course. So that's a quick look at the rotation models. Raise your hand up there if you have any quick questions just about this models. I see Southwestern with their hand up. So Southwestern, go ahead and unmute.
That's an old hand from previously.
That's an old raised hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. and you're an old hand at this. Okay, so are there any questions about the definition of the rotation model? because now I'm going to put you to work for 5 minutes. Okay, seeing no questions, here is your task. And your site leaders are going to lead you through these 3 questions. If you were going to implement a rotation model in your particular setting, what would it look like? What would you have to consider before you could implement it? What would be some of the benefits and drawbacks of using it? Okay, so you're going to lead a 5-minute discussion, really see what you can get out of rotation model, and then we will come back together and share insights. Okay, 5 minutes.
Is it possible to put the previous slide up?
complicated is the word of the day.
Faith too, that
Okay,
you
we're going to bring us all back. Okay, and for this one, we are going to ask for volunteers, not a complete rotation. So anybody have some thoughts that you would like to share or questions you'd like to have the whole group try to address for you on what the rotation model might look like in your particular setting, what you might have to consider, benefits, drawbacks, etc. Had some great discussions here, very lively ones here at Washington Lee. So if you could raise your hand up there if you want to share or ask questions on this particular model. Okay, I see Furman. Go ahead.
We had a question. When we're talking about rotation, station, lab, etc., are we talking about with having different stations within one class setting, one class meeting?
It's normally a station rotation is considered that when it's within one room in the building. It doesn't necessarily have to take place during one class period. So they might rotate to those different stations over a couple of different class periods. I think that's a variation that would depend on what those activities in the stations were.
Okay. That helps us out a lot because we were trying to think of the logistics of if it were to be in one class period, a 50-minute class period or an hour and a half, that would be a lot of I guess logistical. Yeah. You know, you would have to really think that through very carefully, and it just seems like you have to really put your effort in at the beginning, preparing a lot of the activities, and then that would be where the bulk of the work would be.
Right.
And once it's live, then you can kind of sit back a little bit. But even so, you're still monitoring. But Absolutely. It seems like you have to really front load. So
absolutely. Okay. Richmond has a question out there. Anybody want to address it? How would this benefit 300 and 400 level classes? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Allow people to choose different topics.
Okay. Well, maybe. Okay. So we had one here. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think sometimes, I'm not a foreign language teacher, I just teach teachers, but I think it allows, if you have upper level students, you could have choice. And you could actually think of the lab thing as perhaps there are different subjects, I mean topics people really want to explore, and they could go to different stations to do that, and it wouldn't really matter if everyone did the same station or had covered it. You do have to have a little bit of faith in these models where you give people choice that it will be meaningful for them, but I think it can be really, really powerful to have choice.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one thing I think.
Okay.
Could definitely do.
Anyone else? Southwestern, is that an old one or a new one?
Am I there?
Yes.
That's a new one.
Okay.
So we were just reviewing some of the things that we do, and in our planning session that we originally did for this, the obvious choice is dictation and recording, where I don't know if that's so important in the other languages, but in Chinese, to be able to retain the memory of the Chinese character, you need to be able to write it. You need to be able to write it by hand. There's a lot of evidence for that. And so dictation and recording is really important and essential. It's just been a challenge for me to integrate it while I'm doing everything else I'm trying to do. But that's the obvious choice for us for a rotation. And I think it would work at any level, upper level or lower level.
Okay.
If I want to go a little bit farther with that, and this is Chinese only again, but what you're doing is connecting the Chinese character to a sound, a physical production of the sound or a physical reception of the sound, not to an intermediary romanization. And from experience, I haven't read anything about this, but from experience I've learned that when students start relying upon the romanization, no matter how much time they spend on it, they shut down their learning. They can't learn. They're just totally stopped. And so anyway, dictation recording is really essential, and you can test for pronunciation, make it very individual, and it doesn't have to take classroom time to do it on an individual basis.
Okay. Furman has asked for some examples of a rotation model class in foreign languages. We're not going to have a lot of time, but I think that'll be a great question to throw up on the discussion board also and throw out there. I can give you a few quick off the top of my head. The flipped classroom at home, you know, online textbooks where you're going through the lessons, you're coming back and you're doing the actual applications is the one that really is coming to mind. And there is a teacher in Fairfax who I'm going to see if I can get in touch with, who is really working hard to implement a flipped classroom this year. I'll see if I can get some concrete examples, and then I'll ask Dick to share them up on the board for you if I can get those. The lab rotation, being able to go to a language lab, is the obvious choice, either where you're going online with individual accessing of technology, or everybody's accessing the same technology-created quizzes or lessons going through. But as you can see, there's a lot of discussion involved with this. And so I'm going to give you a homework assignment. And your homework assignment is going to be to look at the remainder of these models through the same lens. So for example, when we're talking about the flex model, and the flex model is an individually customized schedule, teachers on site, but the support varies. So it might be I see these students 1 day a week, or it might be I see the students 3 days a week and the rest is offline. So it's flexible depending on needs. What would that look like in your classroom? Same questions. Okay. Taking a look at the a la carte model, that's just what it sounds. I pick one class that I'm doing online and everything else I'm doing face-to-face, or I have 2 classes and everything else. It's a pick and choose what I'm going to do for myself. And then the enriched virtual model. This is that one somebody mentioned. It started out as a fully online school originally, and then they found that they were missing that interaction of the face-to-face environment. And so it's still mostly online, and the face-to-face is brought in to provide the types of interactions that weren't appropriate for the online environment. So it was a support mechanism to enrich that virtual experience. All of these models are fully explained in that Christensen Institute paper. You can take a look at the definitions more clearly there. And then your homework is, what does this look like in your setting? What do you have to consider? What are some benefits? What are some drawbacks? In a university setting, somebody started mentioning this earlier, and there is a report that really outlines some of the things you have to consider. Does your university have a policy about online learning? Or do you need to really get some people on board to take a more formal approach to, do I have to get permission every time? Or is there a set procedure that this is what I do when I want to do this? For planning, I'm not talking about lesson planning, but I'm talking about strategic planning. I'm looking for all of the things I need to identify. What are the goals of my program? What are the needs of my students? What are the objectives of taking this blended learning? What are some of the potential costs? That's probably one of the most complicated and difficult to undertake. And then resources, not just technology, but what are the human resources I need? What are the financial resources I need? And what are the technological resources I might need? Scheduling, not just for students, but for teachers. How will that change? Will it be enhanced? Would I have to look at something differently? And then support, someone here at Washington Lee mentioned, this is absolutely critical. You don't just need support for students in blended learning environments, but you have to have support for the faculty in the blended learning environments. And that last one, organizational and leadership issues, the biggest one I think that I saw mentioned is overcoming that resistance to change. And so those are some at the university level. When you actually get down to designing your course, again, there's more preparation involved prior to it, keeping in mind all these things. What content am I going to teach? What part is going to be online? What part is going to be virtual? How will I allot it between the two? How will I schedule my classes in advance? How will I integrate them and make sure that they're seamless? All those things are consideration. And then I thought you might enjoy this graphic. And you can see the link where we got it from, the Keeping Pace report. It really shows some of the gradations that you need to consider. How much student interaction do I want to have? If I want to keep high student interaction with me, then I'm going to have a low virtual piece. How much delivery is going to take place synchronous and asynchronous. How much of it will be in the school, how much of it will be at home, and how much will be in a different location. Sort of a neat little graphic that helps you think about that. And I thought the conclusions from this Learning Foreign Languages at a Distance report were very appropriate to what we were talking about today. They're flexible, but they may have challenges. The face-to-face component can solve some of the challenges, but that last point, at least 3 of you mentioned this. Careful course design and instructor training are really keys to making this be able to work. Okay? Why do you want to even consider this? Well, hopefully at the end of the day, if we put this in our bag of tricks, it won't solve all our problems, but it might help to increase the number of foreign language speakers in the U.S. if we can draw in and keep more students in by using this as one way to reach them. Okay, so here we go. Check for learning, understanding. All out in the field. A thumbs up. Yes, I can answer this question. Thumbs sideways. I can answer it, but I think I need some help. Thumbs down. I got no idea what this is. One at a time. Can you explain what is best practice? Let me see the thumbs.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, looks like you got that one. All right. Can you tell what is blended learning?
Yes, after the workshop.
Okay, I'm seeing mostly thumbs up. I'm not sure if that's a sideways 1 or 2 out there. I see a thumb that's just wagging at me. Okay. Can you explain some benefits and challenges of blended learning? Mostly? Okay, mostly yes. And then can you talk about what blended learning would look like in your setting? I see some sideways ones there. So that's why you got some homework.
Yeah.
You're going to go back and do a little bit more research. You're going to do a little bit more reading and a little bit more discussion and learning from those who are already out there. I've got a picture of a thumb going all kinds of rotations up there. All right, we can't leave without acknowledging the help of a few people who helped put this together. Dr. Shuhan Wang, who is formerly the Deputy Director of National Foreign Language Resource Center, also worked for the Asia Society, provided a lot of those resources that I mentioned from Star Talk. And then Paul Sandrock from Actvel, who also shared with me some thoughts about blended learning and how it's being implemented across the country that he's seen. All of the resources that I shared with you today are listed on these end slides. And so you'll be able to go and access those links. I've put the links there for you. And lastly, is there any question for the good of the cause that you would like to ask before we release you to enjoy the remainder of this beautiful, not so sunny Tuesday?
Yeah. Do you see, would you say that you see this as the future? Picture of
Not being very good at prognosticating. I'm often not. I think it's very exciting possibility. I think like any other tool, it can be made to work as long as it's being done with fidelity, with proper training, with proper resources, and with proper follow-up. I think like any other model of instruction, it requires a lot of preparation, and how well it will and will not do will depend on the needs of students. Our students are changing. They're becoming more technology demanding. And I read an article not too long ago that said their brains are actually rewiring as we learn to read online rather than in print. And so we're going to have to deal with all kinds of adaptations. So yeah, I think there's a big place for it in the future.
Because I see that, I mean, as I read the articles, there are a lot of universities on board with.
Sometimes you have to be careful, though, I have to say, not to be too much of a skeptic, but I do think some of the online and big universities is to save money, frankly.
Yeah.
Because they pull in huge numbers of students. The other thing I think is that
It's a saving component.
is there's a difference between graduate and, I mean, some adults who really just want to get a credential and get information, I think sometimes find online learning very powerful because they can work jobs, they can do this, they have families, they get together with a cohort once a month or something. That's a kind of a sophistication that I think a lot of undergrads don't have. And I was talking to someone who's doing that, and she said she felt like the online discussions were better because people had to think about what they had to say because they had to type it. And for her, it was great. But, you know, the one thing about coming to a campus as an undergrad, is that there's a whole learning of living on your own, extracurricular activities. You know, there's that sort of piece that you don't get with online.
Hang on one second, I'm going to hold you. Do I see any other questions for the good before I release you back to whatever fall small groups you want to continue with? And if not, let me just say thank you very much for participating today. Thank you for allowing me to come and share with you. Please feel free to unmute. Thank you. And feel free to contact me anytime if you have any questions I can try to answer to the best of my ability. I'm not a higher ed expert, but I do try my best to help out our higher ed folks because that pathway between K-12 and higher ed is very, very important. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the follow-up discussions. I look forward to hearing